Hi, this video is about the ChatGPT Pro Plan. Is it worth the upgrade? The $180 per month more extra you have to pay from the Plus to the Pro. Whether or not you want to go from the free to the Plus is a different decision entirely. I think that there's a lot of benefits in that that's outside the scope of this video. So let's take a look at the limitations you have on Plus to see if these are really affecting you. In general, when I look at all of these are all fine for me. I don't need any more than 80 messages per 3 hours. That's a lot of messages. That's about 26, 27 messages per hour. A message every 2 to 3 minutes, basically, for GPT-4o, which, if you're using it that much, I'm curious what you're using it for, why you would need it quite that much. If you really need GPT 4.5, I'd say this is probably one of the biggest limitations. There are reports of people using as many as several hundred per week and not encountering limits. I don't know why. So this actually came from ChatGPT. They don't provide the GPT-4 anymore. And then you have basically all of these reasoning models for which at the Pro you would get unlimited. I personally don't find these to be incredibly useful. In fact, a lot of times I would prefer to use 4o because it is much faster. There are very narrow use cases where I think that the O series of models gives me a better response. I think that maybe for coding, maybe for some advanced logic problems, but again, I think that's a very narrow use case, and I think for most people, they're not encountering complex logic problems on a daily basis. They're not. Most people aren't coding. Even if you're coding, it's arguable that these are not necessarily the best coding models, or that there's other models that are comparable that are better and faster, like Gemini 2.5 Pro is potentially about the same level of quality and is much faster and less expensive. It doesn't require an extra $180 per month. Now, if you disagree with me on that, if there's any of these models that you find yourself getting a ton of value from, then by all means upgrade. But these are pretty high limits on most of these. So the O3, 100 messages per week, not bad. And then the O4 mini, 100 messages per day. I'm sorry, the mini high, that's a lot of messages. So I think you'd have to use this a lot to run into these limits. What's the value in these unlimited access to all the reasoning models in GPT-4o? For me personally, I don't bump up against these limits. Every once in a while, there's been a few times when I've bumped up against the GPT 4.5 limit, but that's not something that I feel like you have to have. The benefit to GPT 4.5 is it's a little bit more creative. I think if you really wanted to use creativity, I'd probably try Claude 3.7 Sonnet, and you'll get very, very similar, comparable results to GPT 4.5. For even if you upgrade to there, I think it's $17 per month for their paid plan that gives you, I believe it's unlimited access to the 3.7 Sonnet. So a much better deal, I think, there. Okay, you get unlimited access to advanced voice. At the Plus, you get 15 minutes per day. I don't use this, but I know a lot of people who really like this, especially on the app and on the go. You can have a conversation. It's kind of neat. To me, it's inefficient and just not really how I want to go about having the conversation. But again, if you're running into that limit, then maybe it's worth that extra $180 per month. I highly doubt it for most people. So not putting a lot of stock in that. Extended access to deep research. So right now at the Plus plan, you get 10 queries per month for the deep research. And then there's a lazy or lightweight deep research. So you get an additional 15 requests once those are done. I don't think there's a lot of value in that. Let me give you an example why I think that there's not a lot of value in that. Let's take a look at this example of deep research that I used on ChatGPT, where I was trying to analyze the costs long-term of large language models. And I pulled this in April of 2025. And these are the models that it went out and found. GPT-4 Turbo, Claude 3 Opus, Gemini 1.5, Llama 2, Llama 4 exists. So it did a really poor job of this. And I think that there are better tools for this for less expensive. Either go with Perplexity. You can do Perplexity Pro for $20 a month. You might not even need that, but Perplexity Pro is pretty good. Even better, I think, is probably Gemini Deep Research. They have it basically for free. And I think if you run out of it, you can even do a 1-month trial for Gemini Advanced. Google just is a really good deal on these fronts, and I would trust them much more or Perplexity much more than I would trust ChatGPT with deep research type tasks. But if for some reason you're like, no, ChatGPT does the best deep research, more power to you. You get that 10 and 15 goes from 125 and 125. So you get about 10x the amount of total, actually it's exactly 10x the amount of total deep research runs. On the surface, probably one of the most interesting things you get that you can't really get it elsewhere is the operator. Although when you look a little bit deeper at it, this is not very valuable in my opinion. Let's check out this thread on Reddit. And it's good. One of these answers is really funny. What is your experience with Operator by OpenAI? And I've highlighted it right here. It's like the most clueless coworker you've ever had. It shows some promise basically, but overall there's not a lot of benefit to it. It has some very severe limitations. There's not a lot that it can do, and it fails in a lot of ways. And to be honest, I think Anthropic is ahead of the game in this. Their computer use setup that they have is superior, and it's older generation. They released it sooner, so I would expect them to be ahead of the game. And if you've tried to use the API version of their computer usage, I shot a separate video on that. It's really, really poor. It does a really bad job. And there's a reason why there are very limited things that you can do with Operator. So while it might be interesting and theoretically be good to pay that extra money for Operator, I actually think it's not going to save you that much time. I think it's going to fail a lot. And in general, it's going to look a little cool. Sometimes it's going to have some benefits, but overall, not really that great. Okay, access to O1 Pro mode, which uses more compute for the best answers to hardest questions. Based upon what I talked about with the other models, I don't find there a lot of value in the reasoning models. And so throwing more compute, which essentially means it thinks harder, it is not very useful in my opinion. Again, if you really think that O1 or the reasoning models are just making a huge difference for you, and you think there's another level to go, maybe. I think this is probably pretty marginal, but I've heard some people who like it, but in general, I don't think that there's a lot of value in this. Okay, so let's look at Sora. The differences here, you get 10 times the amount of videos, basically 50 to 500, and you get unlimited relaxed. So these are priority video generations. You can generate a bunch of videos. You can do a higher resolution. You can do longer videos, no watermark. So there's a pretty big difference here if you like Sora as video generator. Kling is probably a better video generation for most use cases. And I don't see this being useful for the vast majority of people. Maybe if you're creating faceless YouTube content, to be honest, I think this is more of not a very practical thing to use for 99.9% of people out there. So again, I don't see a lot of value in that. But if you find yourself running into Sora and you really like it, compare it to some of the other ones, it might be worth the upgrade to just really be able to slam out a ton of content with this, longer content. But I don't even think it's the best video model in general. I don't think it follows instructions as well as other models. I think it has some very real issues. And I find that their models, shot a video on this before, they tend to be very, very constrained. It said, it thought my dog was a person, and it said, we can't use pictures of people. And I was putting a picture of my dog into it. Now, maybe they fixed that, maybe they haven't, but that's been my experience with Sora. I used it a few times just to test it out, and then I basically never used it again. So I considered upgrading just for this video, and I think that would have been useful, but I wanted to find one single thing that I actually could get value out of between the Plus and the Pro, and I couldn't find it. I'm not running up against any limits for the reasoning models or GPT-4o. I've run into one time I ran into limits for GPT 4.5, and then I just waited, and it wasn't a really big deal. I don't use advanced voice. It's not very useful to me. I definitely think deep research is not the most competitive. I think there's other tools out there that are less expensive and better, namely Google and Google Gemini and Perplexity. I think Operator is pretty useless as a whole. And again, the GPT 4.5 here, I do get quite a bit more with this. So that's like the one thing where I would consider it if I was trying to do the same thing I was doing before. Basically, like a lot of writing. I still think that there's a better alternative to that, which is Sonnet. I don't like the reasoning models as in general. I think thinking longer also means it takes longer, which don't usually. The 4.0 does plenty of what I need to do when I'm using ChatGPT, and I don't use Sora. So there's not a single thing on here that I really need or want, and so that's the difference. So to me, it's absolutely not worth it. I like the 20 per month plan. I've been paying that for a while. I think it does help versus the free, and I get all the things that I need from this. One thing that I actually did not mention, there are some limits on the image generation, although they've raised them on Plus. There are 50 messages per 3 hours, up to 200 images per day. That's the current limit that I'm aware of. They have not mentioned a limit for pros, but supposedly it's a lot higher. That's a lot of images, and it's been the first week or two after their latest image generation came out, I was running the limits, but lately I haven't been running into limits. So maybe if they made it faster, because it is kind of slow, that might be worth it. That's the one use case. If they're like, oh yeah, super fast image generation, I might actually consider that, because it would save me some time. Because currently the images do take a minute or two to generate, and if they could make that a second or two, I might actually consider upgrading just for that. Anyway, what do you think? Is there anything in the Pro that you think is worth the $180 per month? That's an additional $2,120 per year. Is that worth it to you for any of these? I'd be curious to know. Is there anything in here that I missed that you think is that I didn't talk about? Let me know. If you like this video, if you found it useful, then like and subscribe for more videos. I appreciate you. Have a great day. Bye.